channel, and thank you for joining me for our continuation of this Datsun 521 build. Today we'll be tearing down our donor motor. This is a 1.6 liter turbo diesel out of a Volkswagen Quantum, or a B2 Passat as it's known in Europe. Now, for those that aren't too familiar with this engine, the B2 Passat or the Quantum is a longitudinal mounted engine. So the oil pan and a bunch of other things are already longitudinal, like this motor mount and that tilted back oil filter. So it's going to make our lives a lot easier. One thing I did notice when we went and picked up this motor is it looks like our turbo is locked up solid. It's got a bunch of gunk in it, but other than that, we're going to take this thing apart and see if there's anything else wrong with it. Now, I already mentioned that the turbo was locked up in this motor, but another problem we have is that this thing is missing its vacuum pump. You can see that hole right down there, and that's pretty important because that goes from an intermediate shaft to the oil pump. So if you don't have your vacuum pump, it won't work. And I had a spare one. I thought this was from an AHU TDI, but it doesn't fit, so I'm going to need something from a 1.6. First thing we're going to do is drain out the oil and be sure that it's not full of water. That vac pump hole opened up right into the crankcase, so just want to check the oil. And it looks like it's nice and thick, so even though it was under a tarp, no water got into our oil. This engine is covered in accessories that we don't need or want, and deleting them is going to be the easiest way to more power. We got this alternator, this massive old school AC unit, here's our main pulley, power steering, and the water pump, and that adds up to 4 whole belts. Now all we really need is this water pump, that alternator, and the main pulley. And I'm going to do all this by deleting all these extra belts and do it with a serpentine belt setup from an AHU TDI. When taking these accessories and brackets off, they're all held on by 13 millimeters. So just grab yourself a 13 millimeter socket and an end wrench and just go to town. Now we're going to take off this bracket, and this also holds on the water pump, and we're going to replace it with this AHU TDI bracket that allows us to put the serpentine belt on. Next up we have this bracket. This old diaphragm used to house the cruise control. That would work on the injection pump lever, and that would work on cruise control. I can basically guarantee that this engine will never be hooked up to a cruise control again, so off it comes. This one is fastened by 2 giant 17s, so just pop those off and you'll be able to put the water pump bracket on. Now it's time to pop the turbo off. We'll start with the oil feed line. That is a 17 millimeter. Be sure to get one for the nut and the turbo side. And then we have the oil return. That's 2 6mm Allen keys and then a 13mm for the heat shield. Be sure that O-ring doesn't run off on you. Next we have 4 12mm. These are 12 points holding the whole thing on in place. And there it is. As you can see from where I put it down, it's covered in rust from the smell of it. Next we'll pop off the valve cover. That's just 10 millimeters all around, and then you pull up these 2 brackets, and then it should come up no problem. This one was way glued on there. Someone used a lot of RTV copper, no less. You can see it sticking out of the side, but with a little bit of prying, a little bit of wiggling, it comes right up. This one was using a cork gasket, and like I said, lots of RTV. And this cam is pretty clean. It doesn't have a lot of rust or anything. It's a little bit beat up, but it's probably got quite a few miles on it. Overall, it's in pretty good shape. Before we continue our disassembly, we're going to roll the engine over into the top dead center position and mark everything up. You'll know it's in top dead center when those front two cam lobes are facing up, those two right there. Or if you look on the back of the camshaft, there will be a slot, and whenever that is flush with the head, you're in the top dead center position. Now, it's probably not as important to mark the camshaft, but I like to do it anyway. Personally, I like to leave the cam pulley on when I'm timing a 1.6 or a TDI. I just find it's a lot easier. But the big thing we're going to want is this injection pump. That's really important to keep in time, because otherwise you'll need to break out the tools and get that thing all timed up, and it could be a real pain. And here we go, one more mark for the crank. I'm suddenly realizing I should have taken off that pulley now, but oh well. And there we go. Crank. It's all marked up. Now we just have a few things left to go on this head. First thing I'm going to do is take off this tensioner. These come with the timing kits anyway, and if you hear this one, it's pretty hosed. Speaking of hoses, we do have a hose that goes to the water pump hooked up to the back of the head. Just use a Phillips screwdriver and pop that one off. I always forget this. Now here I am popping off the injectors. I didn't show taking off the injector lines because the camera crapped out, ran out of battery. But those are 17mm. You just use an end wrench and pop them all off. And I'm taking these injectors out. I might put some bigger ones on. I still haven't decided, but I wanted to take them out, at least get the pre-chambers cleaned up, and take a little look at the injectors, just see how they're looking, maybe if there's any oil or any schmoo in there, and get a better idea of what's going on in this engine. I should mention the socket I'm using for these injectors is a 27mm extra deep. My normal deep well socket didn't work. I needed to buy something special for this one, so keep that in mind. So here is a look down our injector holes into the pre-chambers. Most of them look fine. All the injectors were not overly sooty, didn't have anything too sketchy going on with it, except cylinder 4 here. If you look in there, that's got a bit of oil in there. So we might be dealing with a blown head gasket. Now it's time to take the cylinder head off. This thing is held on by 12mm 12 points. Now 12 points are something that Volkswagen and Mercedes are totally in love with, and you might be needing to buy yourself some specialty tools for it. And you're also going to need a big old breaker bar. These things can be tough to pop off. Anyway, some good news here is that these head bolts are 12mm metric. So we got a 12mm block, and that means that I can reuse this bag of head studs that I have. So this engine's getting studs. Great news. So more good news. These cylinder walls look cherry. Looking down these two that I could see, they actually still have their cross hatching. So just going to check the other two as well. Cylinder 1, likewise, so I don't think we're going to even bother with piston rings. Cylinder 4, it looks like it does have a lot of oil in it, and there's oil caked around the block too, so it turns out I think we're really looking at a blown head gasket here. You just see all the garbage on the side there too. And popping off the cylinder head, or popping off the gasket, you can see right there on the gasket, we got a shiny spot all around cylinder 4. So we had a blown head gasket, which in a way is good news, because a head gasket is an extremely fixable thing, and it means this motor wasn't just trashed. So another thing I really wanted to check was what was getting in through that hole that the vacuum pump left us. So popping off the oil pan, that's just 10mm all around. And it's not too bad, no water. There's a beetle and some cobwebs, but aside from leggy FOD, it doesn't look like nothing too bad happened here. And we got some sludge, but this is like a motor from 1985. So overall, little sludge, not too bad. And here I'm popping off a bearing. It's another thing I'm curious about. If we had a blown head gasket, there might have been some water in there. We might have had some mixing, maybe some oil degradation. But overall, it doesn't look too bad. This bearing cap does have a line through it. A little shiny line. So, a little worse for wear. I think what I might do is I might just get some bearings while I'm here. It wouldn't be too difficult. Anyway, that's pretty much all I wanted to do here. Looks like we're not full of water in the crankcase, which is great. That's something I was pretty scared about. So I think this motor is a go. The only problem it really had, it looked like, was a blown head gasket and the turbo. But I'm confident we'll be able to free up the turbo and get this thing back together. Well, thank you very much for watching, and thank you for having patience with me. I've been feeling a little bit under the weather. So if you hear me sniffling in the video or sniffling in the record, that's what's going on. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and have a good one.